Public perception and prejudice were some of the key tools used to keep blacks in their designated place. We may not realize it, but it wasn't only politicians or laws. It was regular folks who also kept the gates, the store owners, the landlords, the teachers, the middle-class whites running the everyday life in the city. Not just blocking black progress outright, but making it slow and keeping the doors halfway open and halfway shut. We're continuing from the 1945 book Black Metropolis by St. Clair Drake and Horace Caton. Respect.
I have nothing against the black man as a black man.
These were the words of a white drugstore owner. He claims to not have any surface level prejudice towards the black man.
He comes into my place of business and I sell him. Not many come in as there aren't a lot of colored people around 63rd and Woodlawn or Dorchester.
This was sometime before 1945. So the demographics of that neighborhood were obviously different because today that area is predominantly black or African American, whichever they decide to identify as.
But I don't want to live with any more than you or any other white person does.
Plain and simple. He says he doesn't have a problem with them on the surface, but he doesn't want to live around them, and he has the right to feel that way.
People who say I like the colored people and don't see why others can't get along with them don't talk practical common sense. Theoretically, all this talk is all right, but you get a white man of this sort to come right down and live with a and he won't do it.
All that talk sounds good in theory. Whites all hold hands with Negroes and let's all get along together. But that's just talk. He says in practice, those same whites promoting this idea will not live next to blacks. And this reminds me of the higher income earning Atlanta whites during the civil rights movement. We're going to talk about that in some upcoming books. Many of them joined with the blacks to promote desegregation of the city. And as a result, the middle and lower income earning whites felt that they were thrown under the bus. And that's because the higher income whites lived far away from blacks, and they didn't have to send their kids to schools with them or mingle with them. They had them in private schools. But the middle and lower income earning whites did have to send theirs to the same school. So desegregation was promoted by people who didn't have to and really didn't want to live next to blacks. This is in line with what this person is expressing here.
They're different from whites and always will be, and that is why white people don't want them around.
Referring to culturally and physically. To him, the difference was large enough to make whites want separation from them. Which again, I really don't see anything wrong with people freely associating with whom they desire to associate with.
But the only thing we can do, it seems to me, is make the best of it and live peaceably with them. The North can never do what the South does. Down there, it is pure autocracy. I might say like Russia. That might have worked here in the North from the start, but it can't be started now, and we wouldn't want such autocracy anyway. They are citizens, and it is up to us to teach them to be good ones. How it can be done, I don't know. It will have to come slow, and no one can give an offhand solution. Everybody says, we don't want the with us. Well, here they are, and we can't do anything. Must let them live where they want to and go to school where they want to, and we don't want to force their rights away.
This last part was similar to what was said in a previous commentary. How the guy wanted Negroes to have all the rights, but just stay in your own community. So what this person here is speaking was the widespread sentiment among whites. Now, did all whites think this way? No. Did the vast majority? I would say yes. This coexistence of folk prejudices with a belief that Negroes should have a chance to develop, if they can, was expressed during the same period by a number of white community leaders. One of the main sources of racial tension in Midwest metropolis is confusion and apprehension about what social change will mean. A very small minority probably feel that the ultimate result of the Negro's rise in status will be amalgamation. That's full social mixing, widespread intermarriage, cultural merging, and the possibility of blending into one group. a fearful thing for many whites. But according to the authors, only very few thought that this would be the outcome. A larger number feel that Negroes and whites will continue to remain socially separate, which is what happened. Very few people think that it is possible to deport Negroes or that they will voluntarily leave the country. And why would they? They viewed the country as theirs just as much as it was every other citizen's. Negroes earned their spot in the country by fighting in all the major U.S. wars. And on top of that, like I said before, this is their country of origin. American Negroes didn't come from Africa. That's hard for a lot of people to understand. Most of their ancestors did, but they didn't. They originated on this landmass, so there was no country to deport them to. So that's like saying, tell the white Americans to go to Europe. White Americans don't come from Europe. They come from America. Their ancestors come from Europe. Let's continue. The general hope seems to be that Negroes will remain segregated socially and in separate neighborhoods and will be content therewith, that they will not force the pace of breaking the job ceiling to the point of precipitating violence, and that they will use their political power wisely. Few people have consciously thought out any such position, but when the Negro issue is raised, or when some incident focuses attention upon Negroes as a problem, this is the type of solution that seems to crystallize in the popular mind. Events, however, are continually forcing white people in Midwest metropolis to face up to their relations with Negroes. When the problem arises, either in actuality or in conversation, they must choose sides, and the tension between democratic idealism and actual practice demands resolution. Choose between what they say they believe in, democracy and equality, and what they actually do, maintaining inequality. When in the throes of such an intellectual and moral crisis, people are susceptible to education and counter-propaganda. During a strike or a war or a depression, education and counter-propaganda can be very effectively used to point up the necessity for integrating Negroes more fully into American life. In those events, humans are more vulnerable to change. So that's when ideas like we are all American is more likely to stick. And Negroes are more likely to be accepted. That's because in these situations, the need for unity outweighs the desire to keep things separate. Most of the social engineers in Midwest metropolis are primarily interested in a long-time program of education and counter-propaganda as a means of changing the folk prejudices. What's a social engineer? These are people who deliberately work to shape public attitudes, behaviors, and social structures over time, like policymakers and activists. So the social engineers in Chicago were interested in how to use education and counter-propaganda to shape the minds of white society and break down some of those popular prejudices they had. They see their problem as one of gradually changing the tone of the press, radio, and screen. They recognize the fundamental necessity of utilizing the schools for incidental intercultural education and the churches for direct indoctrination. See, some people think it's a game when I talk about planting seeds in the garden of your mind, but it's not. There are people out there who know exactly what they're doing, and they know the tools to use to get the job done. And what better tools than the church and the education system to do it? One Negro speaker at the mayor's conference, after admitting the need for education, said,
"The education we need most is the education of association."
Another speaker, deploring the fact that residential segregation tends to separate Negro and white school children, stated,
"It is tragic that American boys and girls in the most impressionable period of their lives are prevented from having the natural and normal contacts which a mixed school system provides. The separate school system develops hatreds, suspicions, and disrespect, which are carried over into our work and play life as we reach adulthood. It is significant that persons who have been taught by both white and colored teachers are more willing to work and play side by side with each other than those who have not had this broadening experience."
Is he one of the whites that the person in the beginning talked about, who says all these magic words about everyone getting along, but in practice will not live next to Negroes? I don't know. But what I do know is you've got to watch them. This almost mystical faith in getting to know one another as a solvent of racial tensions is very widespread. It is undoubtedly true that mere contact is likely to result in some degree of understanding and friendliness. It is equally true, however, that contact can produce tension and reinforcement of folk prejudices, especially if one group is acting in a way that reaffirms the ideas the other group had about them. If they don't act that way, then it could be set aside and pronounced as pure nonsense. So the authors are saying that this getting to know one another can act as a two-edged sword by either building friendships or hardening prejudices. On the adult level, this is especially true if the contact is between Negroes and whites of very different socioeconomic levels. Dr. Charles S. Johnson, the sociologist who directed the study of the race riot in 1919 and served as consultant for the Mayor's Committee in 1944, called attention to this fact when he observed concerning migrants that
the attention of the public may become focused upon the strangeness of the newcomers, upon the mannerisms and folkways that were developed in their social isolation from the best examples of public decorum.
Referring to them bringing mannerisms and behaviors that were first developed in slavery, afterwards modified slightly in the rural South when they were free, and then eventually brought to Chicago. Behaviors and mannerisms which developed out of isolation from the best example of public decorum, according to him.
These are given high visibility by the conspicuous features of the Negroes as well as by their strangeness. Almost invariably, this reinforces racial stereotypes which carry unpleasant and even threatening implications. The areas of contact and racial intercommunication are wider and still widening in labor groups, in some industrial establishments, in some public conveniences outside the Black Belt, and in unsegregated transportation. These broaden contacts, while they accelerate the accommodation and assimilation, also create new temporary problems.
If contact is to play any direct part in breaking the color line, it must be accompanied by a meeting of minds and must involve people of similar taste and interest. That's the key. People of similar interest. Not trying to force people together who don't share important things in common. It is a significant trend of the last 15 years that an increasingly large number of higher status Negroes and whites have been getting to know one another, while, concurrently, thousands of Negroes and whites at the working class level have become organized into the same unions. And that's a great thing. If whites and blacks want to get together and know each other and mingle, they should do so. If another group of whites wants to just mingle amongst the whites, they should be able to do so. And the same goes for blacks and any other self-identifying group. The point is that it works when it's by choice and not by force. These close contacts result in various types of cooperative action and in the multiplication of individual friendships. It is doubtful, however, whether they play a dominant part in shifting the line of color. There are, for instance, perhaps a score of highly trained Negroes in Midwest metropolis who have close and friendly relations with the city's influential and wealthy. These relations, although primarily those between philanthropist and civic leader, often have semi-social extensions, meaning public or professional social events, not private home get-togethers. While such contacts have undoubtedly done much to influence the tone of the press and to secure some mitigation of the Negro's subordinate status, they cannot affect a major break in the job ceiling or the abolition of residential segregation. As we have mentioned, the members of the white middle class set the tone of Negro-white relations in Midwest metropolis. Whites as their authorities and Negroes as their subordinates. And most of the whites wanted a relationship no further than this. Immigrants and their children see in them a model for imitation as they strive to become Americanized. The European immigrants copy that relationship as they absorb themselves into white American consciousness. They began to think of themselves as better than Negroes because of the many examples set by the native whites. The basic type of contact that the Negro has with members of the white middle class is economic. He has to do with them as employers, managers, and officials. He is the customer buying from white merchants and salespeople, the debtor facing creditors and collection agents, the client of lawyers, and the patient of doctors and dentists. Large numbers of Negroes are also in competition with the white lower middle class for jobs in skilled labor or clerical pursuits. Even when the Negro confronts middle-class white people in non-economic relations, he usually does so as a subordinate, as a student under white teachers, a client dependent upon relief workers, a black criminal facing the white law, most of the time encountering whites in a subordinate position. Such contacts do little to create goodwill among white people, but they do leave a residue of resentment among Negroes. The Negro middle class views the white middle class as its competitor, and the Negro lower class sees it as an exploiter. The highly charged relations between the white middle class and the Negroes is a force for social change, though in a negative sort of way. Negroes are stimulated to organize their opposition. They fight to break the job ceiling, to smash restrictive covenants, to dislodge white people from the economic and political control of the Black Belt. Such activities may disturb the racial peace, but they develop self-confidence among Negroes and play an important part in shifting the color line. Negroes became professionals at doing this, and they've got to get the credit they deserve. Breaking through these barriers was a major step in the disruption of white supremacy. Another blow to bring it down like David did to Goliath. The almost complete isolation of the Negro middle class from the white middle class and the organization of their relations in terms of antagonism will no doubt continue so long as residential segregation and the job ceiling remain. Feeble attempts have been made by some of the churches and YWCA groups to sponsor teas, meetings, forums, discussion groups, etc., for bringing Negroes and whites together, but these tend to be artificial and both sides are usually under strain. It was unnatural. It felt forced, like I'm only here because I'm supposed to be. And that's because forced relationships generally don't work. Any major shifts in the social evaluation of Negroes will have to come from their being accepted as equals in a wide range of semi-social situations. Those are places like churches, schools, social clubs, and other public spaces. It had to be equal treatment in those types of places, not just treatment as second-class citizens, and by a break in the job ceiling so that a much larger number of Negroes can function permanently in white-collar and supervisory positions, which eventually did happen. When major shifts in the Negro status have occurred, it has usually not been as the result of education and counter-propaganda, or of engineered contacts operating in a vacuum. They have come in response to the demands of economic necessity and political expediency, like both world wars, which caused labor shortages and required Negroes to fill them, and eventually the Civil Rights era. So blacks had to scrap hard to increase status, and whites fought just as hard to prevent that from happening. That's what gatekeepers do when someone attempts to barge through their doors. So with that, I hope you've enjoyed this commentary. I thank you right now for your time and attention. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.